Hello my friends and welcome to another video. This video is just going to be a chatty one. I thought it would be a nice way to end the year, and so I'm going to walk you through some of my favorite books from the year, some of the lessons I've learned this year because I feel like I've learned a lot of pretty valuable ones, and also I'm going to share some things that I'm going to be working on in the new year. So it's just going to be a little chatty video, probably won't be super long, but I hope you enjoy. I don't know if you can tell, it's actually snowing outside right now as I'm filming this, so I hope these cozy vibes translate over to you wherever you're watching and that you're warm and just having a great day. So I actually put up a little poll on my Instagram because I wasn't quite sure what to do this last video of the year, and I got quite a few requests for either favorite books for the year or like New Year's resolutions, just those kind of videos. So I thought I would kind of combine them all into one, which is what we're doing here today. And I also got lots of other great requests like day in the lives and really great video ideas that I've actually written down on a list, and you'll definitely be seeing them next year, so thank you to everyone who sent those in. So yeah, I wanted to start off this video with some of my favorite books that I read from this year. I think the total is going to come to about 28 books this year, and my goal for the year was 50, so I definitely fell quite short of my goal. But to be fair, I think I set a bit of an unreasonable goal given that I am a full-time student and I work a full-time job, and as opposed to last year when I was an English major, I was just reading a lot more for school, so it made it easier to hit my reading goals. I've since changed my major, so a lot of my schoolwork isn't really reading heavy anymore, and that definitely made it a little harder to hit my reading goals. But nonetheless, I'm really happy that I got any reading done at all, and honestly 28 books is a pretty good number considering everything that was going on. And I will credit a large portion of the books that I actually read and got done to my book club. I feel like if I didn't have my lovely book club members voting and keeping me accountable and just generally, you know, having buddies to read with, I think is a lot more motivating than just reading by yourself. And I am actually going to be making some changes to my book club that I think I will be announcing like probably the day this video goes up. So if you want to click that link and like look at the new pricing levels on Patreon and the new deliverables, I just kind of felt like my previous structure was a bit unfair to my patrons, so I wanted to make it a bit more reasonable and a bit more accessible for everyone. So if you want to check that out, feel free, totally up to you. But without further ado, let's get into my favorite books for the year. So I have 6 books listed here, which is just kind of an arbitrary number. I was thinking about doing top 5, but I found a 6th one that I really wanted to talk about, so I guess it's just going to be 6. The first book that I absolutely adored was On Writing by Stephen King. It's a memoir that he wrote kind of about his life and how it led to him being obviously the very successful author and the career he's had in his life. I read it as part of my I'm Writing a Book series that I did this summer, and I wasn't really expecting much out of it. I was really just expecting writing tips. I wasn't really expecting the whole life story that we ended up getting, and I actually really ended up loving it. It's definitely one of my favorite books I've read this year. King obviously has a beautiful way of writing, but I think in a lot of his books that's sometimes masked by the plot, because his books, horror, thriller, are very, you know, centric on the plot and not so much on like the style of writing and the skill and everything that he uses. Whereas I think in On Writing, because it's a memoir and it's not really plot focused, you can really see how skilled he is as a writer and how he can convey things in these seemingly really simple ways. And because I was in the process of writing my book myself then when I was reading that book, I ended up really admiring just the way he goes about things. Not to mention, I think he had some really endearing life lessons that he shared, and it was just honestly a pretty wholesome book, and I really loved it. So I highly recommend, even if you're not even trying to write, if you love Stephen King as an author, or honestly if you're just looking for a good memoir, I highly recommend On Writing. The next book, it's not really a book, but that I really loved was The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes. So as I'm sure you've seen in my previous videos, I have this like huge giant tome that's a collection of like all the Sherlock Holmes stories that have been written, and they're organized into like how they were published. So the first one is Studying Scarlet, Side of the Four, and then there's a collection of about 8 short stories that are called The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes. So I read those over the summer and I really loved them. I love those Sherlock Holmes stories. I've gushed about it before in other videos, like this is not news to you guys, but I always find myself reaching for them. I find them very comforting, very nostalgic in this weird way, and even though they can be a bit formulaic, it's comforting. It's kind of like watching a sitcom, you know what's gonna happen, you know there's gonna be a happy ending, but at the same time it's just a really enjoyable ride in the meantime. So I loved it. I'm planning to completely make my way through that entire tome by the time I'm done, so I am sure I will keep gushing about Sherlock Holmes as my videos go on. So the next book I read that I loved was The Return of the Native by Thomas Hardy. I love Thomas Hardy. I think I read 3 of his novels now. The first one I read was Far from the Madding Crowd, which I also loved, but I didn't read that last year. It was the year before. And then this year, early on, I read The Return of the Native, and it was just phenomenal. I don't know what it is about Thomas Hardy, because he obviously was writing quite a long time ago. It's not like he's a modern author, but his books are just so like scandalous. I don't know. I loved his writing in The Return of the Native. I thought the plot was super enthralling, and it was very atmospheric, and you had very strong opinions about the characters. It doesn't at all, in my opinion, read like a lot of classic novels do, where it's just a little distilled as compared to modern writing. I don't ever feel that way about Thomas Hardy, and I just love The Return of the Native. I will say though, I still think if you're going to start reading Thomas Hardy, I would start with Far from the Madding Crowd. I think it's a little easier to like digest, and then definitely The Return of the Native. Also, Tess of the D'Urbervilles is good as well. So another book I read that I really adored was Upstream by Mary Oliver. I have been wanting to read Mary Oliver for years now, and this year I decided was the year. I was like, I'm going to read Mary Oliver. So I think in April, right as spring was starting to come, winter was thawing, I thought it would be the absolute perfect time to read some Mary Oliver. And I have to say, it was not at all what I was expecting, because I'd never read Mary Oliver before. I just knew that she was kind of this nature-focused poet, and you know, sometimes she would write essays, but that's really all I knew about her. So I was kind of expecting lots of wild imagery, so I'm thinking like bears by streams and, you know, moose wandering through the forest, and just these really wild images was what I was expecting. But instead, honestly, Mary Oliver just kind of writes about nature in day-to-day life. A lot of her essays in Upstream are just kind of talking about her encounters with nature, both in her childhood and now as an adult in her really small town that she lives in, and these owls that she'll see on her walks, or she rescued a seagull off the beach and nursed it back to health with her partner. Just these kind of chance encounters that she's had with nature over the years and how they've shaped her, and I really love that. I think it made it a lot more approachable, and not so much you have to completely dive into nature to have this relationship with it. No, Mary Oliver was postulating that you just have to exist in nature and with nature harmoniously to have a relationship with it. And as someone who obviously exists in the real world and works and isn't spending all my time camping out in the wilderness, I found that relatable and approachable, and I really appreciated it. Not to mention, Mary Oliver's writing is obviously beautiful. I mean, she is a poet, so I absolutely adored Upstream. My next book that I really enjoyed was Travels with Charlie. That was actually the first book I read in 2022. I read it all the way back in January, and I really did love that one as well. It's kind of keeping this memoir nonfiction theme going, because Travels with Charlie is Steinbeck's recount of taking a road trip across the US with his dog Charlie, and I just thought it was the most endearing little novel. I loved hearing Steinbeck's musings on life as he kind of passed through the states of the US, because obviously different states have different cultures, and he just kind of had these almost like little satiric musings along the way, and I thought they were really funny because most of these states I've been to, or at least know people from, and I loved that. Obviously, another really endearing part of the novel was Steinbeck's relationship with his dog Charlie. You can tell that the two were really attached and had a really special relationship. Steinbeck really seemed to treat Charlie like an equal, like not like a pet and an owner, but a companion, which I really loved and found endearing. And overall, because Steinbeck is one of my favorite writers, I really loved hearing his voice in his writing instead of, you know, sometimes in his novel it's the narrator's voice, etc. I really love just hearing from him, and I highly recommend, if you have a favorite author, seeing if they have written something that's a bit more memoir or nonfiction based, because it always feels like sitting down to like a cup of coffee with your favorite author when you get to hear their voice instead of their writing voice. So the last book I'm going to talk about is We Have Always Lived in the Castle. So this was my first Shirley Jackson novel that I read, and I wasn't really sure what I was expecting. I knew that Shirley Jackson is a horror author. She's written a lot of kind of spooky stories. She wrote The Haunting of Hill House, We Have Always Lived in the Castle, Haunting of Bly Manor I think was also Shirley Jackson, and I know a few people on Instagram who highly recommend her, and I just knew I wanted to read her this October kind of spooky season, and I was not disappointed. I particularly loved that the narration of We Have Always Lived in the Castle is by this young girl Maricat, and how everything we're told is kind of through her perspective. And Maricat is a very odd little girl. Like, she doesn't think like a normal human does. She's almost very very mystical. She reminds me of it like a young witch. Like, she has a really interesting relationship with nature and a lot of talismans and charms, superstitions that I found really interesting and definitely played well into a bit more of a spookier novel. Another thing that I loved about this book, which is just so random, but Mary Cat has a pet cat named Jonas, and the relationship between the two, the whole story was just the absolute cutest. Like, I honestly, if I ever get a cat one day, I will probably name it Jonas, because it's just like, I love the Jonas in this book. He was my favorite character and it was just really cute. So those are my 6 favorite books from 2022. Obviously, all the books I read were phenomenal. Honestly, I rarely feel that a book I read isn't good. Like, I think most books are great. Every now and then there's an exception to that, but in general, there were just some great ones over the year. And now I think I'm going to move on to some reflections from the year. So thinking back on it, this year was a pretty crazy year. At the beginning of the year, I had just transferred schools and was starting my first semester at my new school. So that was very transformative. I've had a lot of change in my life, just everywhere, professionally, academically, emotionally. Everything seems to have gone through a lot of change this year, and I tried to compile them all down into little life lessons that I learned this year. So I'm gonna read those now and kind of elaborate. So my first life lesson is change is hard, but often worth it. And I think it's no secret that change is hard. Most people would probably agree. It's difficult to have routine interrupted. It's difficult to find yourself in a new place with people you don't know. You know, change can mean so many different things depending on what your life is, what life you're living. And for me, a lot of that change was transferring schools, but it was also leaving behind friends. It was navigating new relationships and new spaces. I've moved like 3 times this year, so new spaces that I've been in. And yeah, change is difficult and it took a toll on me this year. I will not deny it. You know, standing where I am now, looking back on all that, I can say without a doubt that I would go through it all again, knowing that it gets me to where I am today. So even though I think it's obvious that change is hard, something that I wish more people would say and would be more acknowledged is that change is hard but worth it, especially if you can see it through and keep pushing toward what you believe you deserve. If you're going through a period of change right now, just know that there are exciting things waiting for you on the other side, and even though it can feel really stressful and transient in the moment, it is also a really special phase of life, and you can almost kind of celebrate the opportunity to just kind of be fluid, you know, not be static or stuck. So my second little life lesson from this year is consistency pays off, and this is mostly in relation to my work this year, which I work in social media. At the beginning of this year, I had just finished, like 2021 was a year of pretty stagnant growth. I hadn't seen much growth on any of my social pages, and it was just a little frustrating and, you know, disheartening because I put a lot of time in. However, I will say now that I think that period of stagnation was necessary because I don't believe that my content was up to par, and I think it took that time, that year, for me to keep pushing, keep going, keep uploading things even if they weren't doing well, for my content to get to where it needed to be for me to see growth. And then I did see growth this year. Consistency can feel hard sometimes because you can be doing something for weeks or months or years and like never see an end result, and you're like, okay, like why am I doing this? Why am I wasting my time? Why am I putting in all this energy, all this emotional weight if I'm not getting anything in return? And I think sometimes there's something to be said for just calling it and saying, let's focus on something else. But if it is something you really dream of, whatever that is, you know, some people dream of being an author, some people dream of, you know, certain career goals, whatever it is, there is something to be said for just keeping going, never letting up, even on the days when it feels really disheartening. And at least my experience in life so far has been that it always does pay off one way or another. So this lesson was one that I'm definitely still working on. I felt it a lot this fall, so pretty recently, is when your relationships, your outward relationships with others feel like they're strained or failing. So, you know, romantic relationships, familial relationships, platonic relationships, whatever it is, when they feel like they're kind of straining and not what they used to be, I've found this year that most of the time that's because inward your relationship with yourself is failing. So for me, I was noticing that my relationships were struggling with other people, and I was kind of getting frustrated by that because I was already having a hard time mentally, internally, and outward relationships failing was just not helping. And then I kind of realized, well, those two things are probably related, and I really had to take some time to get my mental health under control and reevaluate the space within myself and refurbish my relationship with myself and create a more loving relationship with myself. And then once I did that, my relationships with others started to heal again. And I think we kind of forget that. We think that the two are separate, but I actually think all of our outward relationships are anchored by our relationship with ourselves. And if our relationship with ourselves is failing and we're not giving it proper attention, it is going to take its toll on our outward relationships. So that is definitely something I learned this year, and I will not be forgetting it again because it is an important lesson to know. Lastly, I wanted to go through a few of my goals for the new year. I'm not usually one for New Year's resolutions per se, but what I do like to do at the New Year's is kind of step back, evaluate my year that happened, and kind of write down some hopes for the new year, broad goals that are usually more emotional and behavioral for the new year. So my first goal that I'm really excited about and have been loving a lot lately is continue chasing my passion for photography and videography. If you follow me on Instagram, you probably will have noticed a bit of a shift in my content over the past couple months. I've really been focusing on quality of photos and quality of videos, and I've really been loving playing around with kind of this cinematic feel, especially in my videos, and it has just been the most amazing chase. I feel like I'm constantly chasing this improvement and this progress, you know, in terms of the art of photography and videography, and it has been my favorite thing these past couple months. I feel like I still have so much to learn when it comes to camera gear, camera settings, technique, just all those things that I think you could learn for years and never know it all. I mean, the world of photography is just vast and endless, but I have really been loving it, and it feels cool to have a hobby. On the one hand, it is for work, but on the other hand is also for myself. Like, even though I am posting these photos and videos, I am really loving the process. Like, when I go out with my camera, it feels like therapy to me. I just love being out in the world with my camera. So anyways, that's definitely my #1 goal for the new year, is just to keep chasing that passion and proving and working, and I think it's gonna be a really cool year to see kind of where I can go with my photography and videography. So 2023 is going to be my last full year that I'm in school. So I have spring semester, summer semester, and fall semester, so that'll take up all of 2023, and then the following year in 2024 I'll only have spring semester, and then I'm done. I'm graduated. So this is my last full year in school, and for it I just want to focus on finding a better balance between school, work, life. I feel like sometimes I'm just completely burnt out, and I have one more year left, one more year and an extra semester left, and I want to focus on finding better balance between all those things. So that is definitely one of my goals for 2023. We'll see how well I do it. I have tried to set this goal in the past, and I will openly admit that I'm pretty terrible about setting boundaries about like rest and, you know, not working all the time and not doing school all the time. I'm pretty terrible about setting those boundaries, but I'm going to keep trying. I'm going to try it again this year and see if I can strike a better balance. Lastly, coming back to that reading theme again that we started the video with, I would like to let myself read more books this year that I actually want to read. So lately I've been really gravitating towards nonfiction or memoirs. Like I was kind of saying, you could tell my favorite books this year are mostly that genre. I think if I just kind of pick out those books when I'm book shopping, or just make a point to make those more available and not feel like I need to always be reading fiction or classics, I think I'll enjoy my reading a lot more. And obviously the secret to doing something is to enjoy it. So I would love to work on making that a priority, just reading things that I'm genuinely interested in, because that shifts over time. I mean, it used to be that I only read classics and that's all I wanted to read then. And now I really am naturally drawn toward nonfiction, and I'm sure in a year or two that will change. But I think it's important to kind of tailor your reading to what you feel now and not what used to be the precedent. Like the books I used to want to read aren't really what I reach for these days. That's perfectly okay. And I think if you try to force that, you're just not going to end up wanting to read, and it's just unnecessary. So I just want to read more of what I love this year. So all in all, that was a little chatty video for you guys. I hope you enjoyed. I really loved this year with you all. It was a wonderful year. We hit some awesome milestones. You guys have been so kind and so supportive, and I am going to try and get my YouTube mojo back in the new year. I know it's been a little slow around here. Life has been crazy, but I have some updates for you that I'll be posting in like the community section of the channel, and generally I think it's going to be a great year here in the channel, and I'm really excited to take you guys along with me, and I will see you soon. I hope you have very happy holidays and a wonderful new year, and yeah, that's all I've got. Bye friends.